Here I have 5 jazz blues heads. If you follow my channel, you know that I like every now and again to go over different jazz blues melodies, blues heads. If you're new to my channel, welcome. The idea here is that not only are we going to learn these melodies, we're going to learn something from them. Each one of these can teach us something about this thing that we're trying to do, which is jazz improvisation. So without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? The first one is by one of my favorite guitar players, maybe top 3, George Benson, Giblet Gravy. So I'm going to use Drum Genius, the loop app, to play along here. So we're not going to use a backing track, more like a drum loop. So I want to focus on timing in this lesson. So this is a Boogaloo groove. So the drum loop I'm using is from this app Drum Genius, and this one is called Boogaloo a la Al Foster. So this is a Boogaloo. It's not swing, right? Like it's an even kind of 8 feel. It's like a funk groove almost. So it's just like a riff. And then it goes to the 2 chord instead of the 5 in the turnaround, and then 5-1, which is a very common thing to do in regular blues as well. This is not very hard to play necessarily. What I want you to focus on though is the timing of everything. So one aspect is, am I playing it with a very even feel? Or do I want to swing it? And you might say, well, it's not swing, right? It's an even feel, but the answer is it's somewhere in between, not only between the triplets and the even 8s, but also in between you and the other musicians, in this case a drummer. So if there should be a tension between what you're doing and the other musicians, that's how these legendary albums have a great feel, because there's a dynamic between the different musicians. This is much harder to kind of practice, right? But you can think about these things. So you can experiment with trying to play with a very much swing or no swing at all. Imagine like if you've ever used Logic or some software like that, where you can play something and then you can quantize from 0 to 100. There are even some YouTube videos where they do that. They take a phrase and then they go through every step of swing. And I'm not saying you should think like that when you're playing, but if you experiment with this stuff, this is how you can kind of prepare yourself for the live playing situation where you don't want to be thinking about things like this. You just want to be playing. Maybe try a very straight feel. Also try to throw in chords. Or if I swing it, or maybe even change in the middle of a phrase. You know, those are the things that make music come alive. And I am a strong, firm believer in playing along with recordings. I can't play it here because I get in trouble with YouTube, but this is from a George Benson album. First, maybe just play along for fun, and then after a while, maybe try to pay more attention to exactly what's going on and try to imitate the masters. That's how we learn, right? It could also be a case where the melody is maybe pushed, or maybe the melody is laid back against what the other musicians are doing. And this is also very difficult to kind of practice in the practice room like this. You need a actual rhythm section, but you can still think about these things to prepare yourself for the real situation, as it were. So the chord I was playing is just like a F13, right? So the point here is that the timing is kind of more important than, because this is pretty straightforward. It's just a blues, the Mixolydian scales and blues. You would play Mixolydian scales and blues scales, the blues scale combined. So that's the next step. You try to play along or play along with this loop, and then maybe get into some kind of improvisation. It can be nice every now and again to think less about all this kind of theory stuff. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't practice theory and think about scales, but to put that aside and just think about the groove and just, playing with a kind of a good feel. One more thing before we leave this, every phrase is the same, just moved according to the harmony, but the C7, he plays this, I think, or so it's like an A minor triad down to G minor, which is like this thing. So this is like a triad pair. It's something you can experiment with. So it's an A minor to G minor. But I think it's just maybe playing the outer notes, like sixths, I don't know. These are all gonna be on my Patreon page. This next one is Turnaround by Ornette Coleman. So here we need a swing. This is definitely swing, like maybe a medium swing. This is a loop of Art Blake is playing on Along Came Betty. Maybe a little bit slower. Okay, here we go. 2, 3, 4. Here you can really experiment with maybe dragging. And then soloing. Just play blues. Oh, by the way, the soloing, you don't play those weird chords there. I don't think people do that. It's just the regular blues, like a jazz blues or a regular blues. Those chords are just for the head. And this is a very common thing in jazz, that there's a blues form, but for the head there's some weird reharm or different chord changes. But then when this soloing starts, it's just regular blues. Most of us watching this probably know this tune because of Pat Metheny. So Pat Metheny, I think he recorded it on several different occasions, but it's Ornette Coleman. So it's like starting a little bit more into the free jazz, even though it's not free form, but this stuff is obviously not blues harmony. It's some parallel harmony or non-functional harmony. Also, the way Pat Metheny plays on this is very, very interesting, timing-wise. So I wasn't sure how to notate. It's difficult, right? Because the notation system we use is not for jazz music. It's not meant for swing originally. So we have to come on figure out how to notate these things, because it's a combination of triplets and eighth notes here. I think you understand. And this... that's how Pat Metheny plays it, but I think it's different in the original version. It's a good example of kind of forward motion, like that phrase is kind of pushing ahead, and this, some people call this technique also side slipping when you do that. So it's a very interesting tune. You should definitely check out Pat Metheny's version of this. Next is one that people have commented, why don't you do this one, The Thumb by Wes Montgomery. So let's do it. I think we can even use the same drum loop here. It's also a funny thing, you can click on a little thing here and it gives you the clave. No, there it is. I don't like that clave there. Let's get rid of it. 1, 2, 3, 2. Some interesting things, the chord stabs. It's kind of modern, right? Like that's how Kurt Rosenwinkel plays, with throwing in those chord stabs. That's that Magic 4. I talk about that in my comping. I think it's my comping video. I did one, and then I also did a video in the same kind of, around the same time, where I talk about timing. Beat 4 is very important in jazz, if you can understand that. 2, 3, 4, 4. And then there's this syncopated line, which is also very interesting. And then we have this. It's a kind of cliche blues, jazz blues phrase. It's like that tune, Don't Get Around Much Anymore. Is that what it is? At the turnaround at the end there, I think it's different how he plays it. The first time he plays it like that, I think. The second time he does something different with the top note. What I like to do is to play a B flat as a top note for all the chords. Next up is Grant Green, one of the other masters. We're looking at all the masters here. And Wes Montgomery, George Benson, Grant Green. What else do you need? Pat Metheny. Well, it was actually Ernest Coleman. Here we need a little bit faster swing. So maybe mediums up swing. There's so many you can choose from here. This is perfect. This is Louis Bellson from Blues Around the Clock. Count Basie. So I'm not against iReal Pro, right? Like, but here we're using loops, so there's no bass, which is actually good. And not that I don't like bass, but to practice with just the drums is very good, because you have to kind of keep the harmony in your head. You don't get the harmony from somewhere else. You have to keep the form happening, and focusing in on the drums and kind of interact. Obviously, it's still some kind of machine, even though it's a real loop. I think this is a recording, but so ideally you would do this with a drummer, but we don't always have the luxury of having a drummer accessible in our home. But if you can practice, you don't need to always have a whole rhythm section. You can, if you're a guitarist and you have a drummer friend, just practice with drums. So I'm not saying you shouldn't practice with iReal Pro. You can practice with iReal Pro also, but iReal Pro won't really help you with the timing that much. This is much better for that. That was number 4, right? So here's number 5, Sidewinder. So this is a 24 bar blues, meaning that all the chords are twice the length of a regular blues. And here I actually have the exact, that loop, drum loop is in here somewhere. It should be under Boogaloo. Yeah, Boogaloo 5, New Orleans flavor, Brazilian 2-3 clave. Example, listen to Billy Higgins on Sidewinder. Okay, so maybe this is not an exact loop from the recording, or if it's a recreation. I don't know how that works, but it sounds really good. So this is Sidewinder. So the first chorus is just the chords. So it's funny how all the chords are kind of approached. This is kind of jazz that you can play on a trendy, trendy bar for hipsters. So this record was a monster hit, sold a lot of copies, and the piano player I learned recently is actually Barry Harris. And when I talked to Chris from Things I Learned from Barry Harris, he talked about that. Apparently Barry Harris never mentioned this album, but it must be the biggest album he was on.
Obviously, his most famous recording that he's on is Lee Morgan's Sidewinder. He's the pianist
he's on
for
there.
Sidewinder.
Okay.
Yeah. So he, by the way, never talked about that album. Never talked about that album. Doesn't even bring it up. It's not. But his first trio.
So again, listen to the difference between if I'm playing like. Swung like that, or if I go. Again, you might say, well, which one is it? I don't know. It is depends. So you don't have to. If let's say you would play this with a band, you don't have to play exactly like they do. Maybe you change the groove and play something different. But in my experience, there is somewhere in between. That's where the magic happens. When there's a tension between different timing and time feels. That's where it's interesting. And that's why certain drummers and bass players are kind of legendary, because they have this magic, vibe between them. And for those of you who are musicians, I'm sure that you have every now and again you play with maybe a bass player or drummer. It's just not feeling right, even though there's nothing wrong. You hear them play with others and they sound amazing, but when you play with them, it's just like we don't have the connection because we have our time feels are not incompatible or something. I don't know. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It's just that how it is. So if you go to my Patreon page, you can get all of these, and I recommend playing along with the recordings. Get the app, Drum Genius, play along. Just set the loop and play for hours. Pick one of these, learn it, and just play it. And then just after a while, start experiment with the timing. See if you can like push or drag and see if you can kind of stretch the time. This is the thing that is much harder to teach too, right? Like you don't see this much in jazz books and stuff. They talk about like this is the scale that goes with a chord. If you ask me what scale you use over a dominant chord, well, a Mixolydian, that's easy and I can teach it. And then first you don't know it, then you know it. You've learned something. Okay, good. Let's move on. This is much more difficult. So when you go to teach it, like, how do I develop a good time field? The answer is often, well, you have to figure it out yourself. Listen to records and just play a lot of music. So you have to go out there and play with people. But there is a lot of preparation you can do. And the more you work on your timing and playing difficult time signatures, and that's another aspect. I'm not going to try to rant here, but why you want to play difficult stuff, like let's say with quintuplet subdivisions and septuplet subdivisions, and practice that stuff because, or it's polyrhythms and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll show students that stuff and they'll say, well, I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to play complicated music like this, like complicated world music or complicated jazz fusion. But it's like, no, that's not why you should practice it. You should practice it so that you have the ability to do this. So imagine if you're a drummer and you can play even. And then I say, swing it. Okay, swing it a little less. This happens. It happened the other day when I was rehearsing with some people, and the piano player, we were all like, maybe you should swing a little more. Well, you need technique. You need to be in control of your technique to be able to do that. You can't just do it if you haven't practiced, right? So that's why it's good to practice with a metronome and try to do difficult stuff. So, all right, so I'm talking too much. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm off to go and see Pat Metheny. Thank you for your time and attention. I shall see you next time.